Okay, great. Yes, it's great to be here with you, and thanks for staying up late. Looks like everyone here is from the U.S. at this point. So yeah, it's great to be here. I'm um, I'm a specialist in Ottoman history, so I did my doctorate at UCLA, and I specialized in modern Middle East history and with special emphasis on the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire has just been a love for me ever since I think I was in high school. Just a really interesting political entity with so much diversity, and so it never it never bores you. And I was working at Brigham Young University as a professor teaching Middle Eastern history classes, but now I've moved over to Family Search, and I've been having a lot of fun scoping out archives and looking at records for the past few months. And I'd love to take any questions that you may have during this presentation. So I'll try to keep my eyes on the chat as I am discussing the Shariah Court records. But if I get too involved with what I'm saying, I might miss something. And so once I've completed the presentation, I'll also look to the chat to see if you have any questions. And we may be able to even open up the mute at that point so everyone can ask questions if they want. Yeah, feel free to just type out any questions you have in the chat. And I will now share my screen and we will get started. Okay. I hope everyone's seeing my screen. Do you see it, Julie? Okay, great. Okay, so Shariah Court registers. Oftentimes, the word Sharia in the Western world strikes fear in the hearts of many sort of like people that haven't ventured out in the Middle East. I wouldn't be afraid of Sharia. I don't think this is. We often take a negative approach to this idea of religious law. It's important to recognize that a lot of our legal codes bear the imprint of religion on them. And certainly in the Middle East, Sharia courts still exist, but they don't operate in a much, I'd say, in a fashion that would make someone from, say, the United States who has no exposure to Islam be frightened. Generally, these courts are, in fact, very. If you go into a proceeding, they're very informal, and that's one thing that's sort of interesting. And I think that has a long history because the judge sort of lived among the people and interacted among the people. The judge of the Sharia court would be referred to as the Qadi. And still to this day, right, a Qadi is a respected person within the community, but generally someone that is on a friendly basis with people. So it sort of has a more familiar sense than sort of courts that you may be used to in, say, the United States or in Western Europe. Now, I'll be talking about Sharia court registers today and how they can be used for family history. We refer to these records as Sijillat. Sijillat is a plural word. And if you listen to historians, they will often refer to them in the singular as sigil and in the plural as Sijillat. These records are dispersed all throughout the former Ottoman realms and even into, say the Persianate world as well. And I'll speak to that today as well in this presentation. And it's also important to recognize that these records that that are accessible in archives and still in functioning courts today, they can be useful not just to Muslims, but also to people who have, say, Christian or Jewish heritage. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. Now, why is this not? There we go. Okay. Now, we're going to talk specifically in this presentation about Ottoman Sijillat. And I'll mention the Persian, the sigil of Persia, but there's not that many of them, and I'll explain why that is. But the Ottoman Sijillat are really an exceptional. My Teams is just going crazy. I'm sorry, Julie. It's really bothering me. I should have turned that off. I didn't think it would explode like this. I'm sorry for everyone that's listening right now. Okay, so why the Ottoman Sijillat? Well, the Ottoman Empire lasted for a good 6 centuries, and it spanned basically the entirety of what we consider the Middle East today, with a few exceptions. It also had important territories within the Balkans, and in fact, it was both a Middle Eastern and a European empire. And what the Ottomans did was they developed a system, a sort of standardized system of record keeping for their Shariah courts, which is probably a new development in jurisprudence in the Muslim world, because we do know that records were kept in Shariah courts prior to the advent of the Ottoman Empire, but none of them exist in the world at this moment. So the oldest Shariah court records are Ottoman Sijillat. Now, it's important to recognize that within the Ottoman Empire, there were sort of 2 systems of law. There was the religious system of law, Sharia for the Muslims, and also for civil cases, many of them could be tried within a religious context in the other minority religions within the empire, say within the Orthodox Christian community or within the Jewish community. There was also a secular form of law that was really what we could call, it was supposed to be sort of informed by Sharia law, but this was really sultanic law. This was the law of the sultan, and it was referred to as Kanun. So not everything that was tried, either civil or criminal in nature, was tried within the Sharia system during the Ottoman centuries. Many times the Ottoman governor had sort of the power over life and death and could try his own cases utilizing this sort of sultanic law of Kanun. Now, what can you find in these registers? In the Sijillat, you'll find a lot of civil law cases. The Qadi would have been approached for marriage contracts, divorce contracts, inheritance, custody of children, property transactions, and that's just to name a few. It's also important to recognize that the Sharia court system tried criminal cases as well. But what we see is that while in the early centuries of these records, there were many criminal cases tried within the court, as the Ottoman state begins to centralize in the late 18th century and really sort of becomes a more centralized state by the late 19th century, almost all criminal cases disappear from these records. In fact, by 1877, there's a new system of law within the empire, and there are no criminal cases tried within the Ottoman Sharia courts. Now, these Sijillat contain the records of cases brought to the court by Muslims. There was usually a petitioner and basically a plaintiff in these cases. But it's also important to recognize that this was also fulfilled the function of a notary as well. So many times, right, there wasn't really someone that was bringing up a course, a suit against a plaintiff. It was merely to sort of get their transaction, whatever transaction that was, affirmed by the court. Now, it includes Muslims, but it also includes Christians and Jews. And why is that? Well, the interesting thing is that many Christians and Jews would elect to go to the Shariah, to utilize the Shariah court. They were allowed to do that because the Ottoman Empire was an Islamic empire. And even though they could try their cases within their own sort of religious framework called the Millet under the Ottomans, but many times they found that if, for instance, they were women, their rights were actually they could obtain rights that they couldn't within their own Christian or Jewish community. So they would actually elect to go to court. And so many times I've seen within Sijillat, inheritance, divorce, marriage records that were actually either tried within the Shariah court system or were notarized by the Shariah court. Now, the records, what exists today? Well, today we can find records dating back, sometimes very few, but some of them to the very earliest centuries of Ottoman rule in the late 14th century. But for the most part, we find records really sort of a lot of records in archives in courts that are still in function today, starting in the 16th century, so in the early 1500s, and they continue up until the end of the Ottoman Empire in World War I. Now, where are these archives? Where can you find these records? Well, some of them are centralized within a sort of state archive system. Some of them are sort of very dispersed throughout the country, in which, right, the Shariah courts continue to function, and some of them have been digitized and they're available online. Now, I'll mention a few of the locations where you can find these. Most of these are sort of most of these are actual physical archives that you will have to travel to, but I will mention the one sort of digital archive that is available to the open public. So in Greece, if you're interested in ancestors that lived in the area of, say, Macedonia, so sort of both North Macedonia and Macedonia and Greece, and the rest of Greece, you can find a large collection of Sijillat in the Historical Archive of Macedonia, and that's located in Thessaloniki. You can, if you're looking for ancestors from, say, Bulgaria, the St. Cyril and Methodius National Library of Bulgaria in Sofia is an excellent place to look. They have a large collection of Sijillat. There's farther north in the Balkans, you can find in the Institute for Oriental Studies in Sarajevo a considerable collection. Some of this was destroyed in the war a few decades ago, but they still have quite a few registers there. One of the largest collections is understandably in Istanbul. This is at İSAM, that's ISAM. It's the Islam Araştırmaları Merkezi, and it's located on the Asian side of Istanbul. And it's one of the largest libraries for anyone who's interested in sort of Middle Eastern history, but most of their holdings are in Turkish. Now, you can find in this collection registers from not just Turkey, but also the Balkans. So from Macedonia, Bulgaria, the Crimea, even Damascus, Aleppo, Jerusalem. And that's just to name a few. Now, some of these have been digitized. And if you look up ISAM and you look up Kadı Sijilleri, which I'll put in the chat later, you can locate these registers and see which ones have been digitized. I believe the only ones that have been digitized, they've actually been digitized and transliterated. I think they're only for the actual sort of space of Turkey itself. I haven't found any. Well, actually, no. There are some from the Balkans, I should say. There are some from Rumeli. We'll actually look at a sample from that today. And then also, right, throughout the Middle East, if you go to, say, I mean, in Damascus, there's quite a large collection there in their archives. I don't think anyone will be traveling there from this group, but if you do, look me up. I'd be interested to know how you got in there. Now, the University of Jordan actually has quite a large collection. They have all the Sijillat from the period of independence of Jordan, or sort of the mandate period with the British. So from about 1921 until 2003 in their microfilm collection there. And then in their manuscripts collection, they have Sijillat from both Palestine and Jordan. So that's something to look at. And Brown University actually has quite a nice collection from Palestine and Lebanon. And they've been digitized, and I reached out to them to see if, right, if outside sort of users, if non-Brown students can use their digital archive, and they informed me that they could not. So I think I'll probably take a visit to their library at some point just to see what is the availability and how we can actually gain access to these very important records that they have digitized. Now, moving on, there we go. There are some limitations to the Sijillat. Many times they are lacking indices. So you could go through a whole book, a whole register with hundreds and hundreds of cases, and there is no index. And so that makes it a bit difficult to locate an individual, an ancestor within sort of, right, these hundreds of pages. They are in narrative format, which means it requires a bit of reading. These are not tabular cases, right? Every case is sort of expressed. It's a nice, dense text, but nonetheless, it does require reading. And finally, probably the greatest hurdle is that they're written in Arabic or Ottoman Turkish. And that presents difficulty even for competent scholars of those languages, because you have to be versed not just in the language, but in the paleography, because these are all handwritten records. Some transliteration efforts have been made, and they've been made into the Latin script. So basically the Ottoman Turkish, which is sort of essentially a dead language, can now be expressed with the modern Turkish Latin based alphabet. And so that ISAM organization, they've taken those many of those registers and they've transliterated them, so they're very easy to read through. And I'll show you an example of that at the very end of this presentation. Now, if someone is sort of interested in perhaps family history research or genealogy in Iran, there's greater difficulties, not just because, right, travel to Iran is sometimes difficult, especially from certain countries like the United States, but the fact is that the Persian dynasties, like say the contemporaries of the Ottomans, the Safavids and the Qajars, did not seem to have implemented a standardized system for record keeping. And the individual qadis, and these were referred to in the Iranian context as mujtahids, they kept their records at their homes, and so it's been very difficult now for historians to actually locate these sijillat and sort of bring them to an archive. There are a few out there, but they're very limited, and the ones that do exist seem to are only from the largest cities. I think most of them are just from Tehran, and I think there's just a handful of them running around. Now, before I finish this presentation, I just want to give you an example of what you can find in these records, and how powerful they can be for sort of for your own personal investigations. So this is a record that has been transliterated by Isam. It's basically taken from this year. This is sort of Ottoman Turkish transliterated into the Latin characters, and it says Filyevmi Sani min Urabi il Ahir Lisene Tisa ve Hamsin ve Elf. What that means is that's the actual date. And this is the date in the Hijri calendar, so in the Muslim lunar calendar. And so you actually have to calculate this. There's a lot of calculators that you can find to actually find out when this actually was. I think I ran this through. It says basically that it's from the year 1059, which is about 1645, 1647 when I looked it up. And this is it's the second day of this month, Rabi al-Akhir. So this is a very old record, right? This is close to 400-year-old record, and you find that this is a basically an inheritance record, Georgi ve Konstantin. So obviously these people were Orthodox Christians given their names. So this was all transacted at a Shariah court. Okay, so this is Georgi. Oh, I should say Georgi Veled Konstantin. So I was thinking it was Anne, but this is Georgi, son of Constantine. So Georgi has died. We get to know his father, who was Constantine. We also get to know who his partner was, Yekzelo, son of Haroni. And we get to know who is inheriting Georgi's property. And basically his partner, Yekzelo, has to sort of, has actually handed over the property, which I think turned out to be something like 20,000 silver akçes. And I think there was, when I read through this, and there was 100 bags of flour. He was a flour salesman, like Flour, flour. And we also get to know not just who died, but who inherited it. So his brothers, Manoli, Po, and his sisters, Anasto, Kondo, I can't read the other one, have to move us, Trandafilo, and Urico, and Istano. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sisters, and even his mother, who outlived him, Andriani. So they inherited it. So we get to know these family relations, and we also get to know where this occurred, where these people were living. So it was in the Vezice district, in a village by the name of Akova. Now, there's a lot of akovas. In Turkish, that means basically white fields. So that you'll find a lot of akovas all around, anywhere where the Turks were living. But then we get to know exactly where. So it's important to understand which province this was in. And so it was in the Rumeli province. So this was actually in sort of the Kosovo, Montenegro area, that Akova. And so we know exactly the date, right, when this occurred. So we know more or less when Yorgi died. We know his father. We know who his partner was. We know where they were living. We get to know basically his entire family. We also get to know that he probably didn't have any children because, right, they didn't seem to inherit anything from him. So that's what you can do with these records. So they are potent, but it's hard to find the individuals in them. And so that's really what you should keep in mind, is that this, if you really want to get into the Sijillat, you're going to have to spend a lot of time and effort, and you're going to have to know precisely the location, which register you're looking for. Now, that's all I have for the presentation right now, and I'll open it up for questions now. Okay. So I'm looking. I
haven't seen any specific questions about your presentation, but maybe if people have them now, they can raise their hand.
So if you have questions right now, feel free to ask them. I've got another, I think, 20 minutes before I have to go teach another class. Or we can unmute them as well, if you'd like. I don't think we have that many participants at the moment.
Yeah, I can ask people to unmute.
Okay.
Oh, here we go.
Okay, so a child born in Istanbul in 1919. Okay, the Sijillat aren't going to be helpful for that. But what you can do is you can locate them through the Turkish records. So basically, this is at the transitionary period between the Ottoman Empire and the formation of the Republic of Turkey. And the Ottoman practices were actually pretty robust in surveilling their population, counting them. So they registered their population. They issued every subject a sort of ID card. But unfortunately, the Ottoman records, which are generally open to the public, won't help you for 1919. And so what you'd want to do is petition within Istanbul. If you know the child's name, you can petition to find the records of that child. You can do that with a Turkish lawyer, and it's rather inexpensive. And I have a few friends that are lawyers within Turkey, and you could always reach out to me if you need some legal advice on that. But the Turkish state would have. That's my email there. You feel free to reach out to me, and I'll try to get you in contact with lawyers, and they can tell you exactly how you can petition to see the records for that specific child. Let's see. The next one is, do these records include any passenger lists or mention people arriving from another area, as some passenger lists don't always have? These are not passenger lists. Okay, these are court records. I don't know if we could talk a little bit more about that. So yeah, I don't really know how to help there. Child was born to U.S. Navy man and mother of royal family. Which royal family? Sounds interesting. I'm intrigued. If you know of Eastern European background, but DNA showed some Middle East, Iran, Iberian, is there a way to trace back that far? Okay. Yes, there is a way to trace back. It just depends on how far. So if you have Middle East, Iran, or Iberian DNA in your in your makeup, then you'd probably want to look at the records of your family. And what you'd probably see is that there's a lot of population movement into Eastern Europe from the Middle East. Certainly the Ottomans ruled over large portions of what is now hopefully still Ukraine. So there was movement of people from there. Iranians followed the Turks in many of their conquests. So that might explain that DNA makeup. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I guess we'll leave it at that. I'm happy that you all attended. I hope this was informative for you. If you do have any questions, you can always reach out to me, and I'd be happy to sort of direct you as best I can. Going into archives, right? You can never discover the whole archive. You can spend your whole life just focusing on one archive, and you won't know everything that's in there. But I have a broad understanding of various archives throughout the Balkans, the Middle East. So I'd be happy to help you in some way. Okay. Any pre-1400s records for Knights Templars in the area? No, probably not. Any records, any records that we really do have in any great abundance really begin in about the 1400s for the Ottoman period. Previous to that, right, there are some there are some manuscripts, but they won't help you find individuals as much as help you find only sort of eminent individuals. So that's I guess it depends on who you're looking for in that case. Okay. So any other questions? Yes, and I also do hope the records become more accessible. And we're at Family Search, we're working for that as well. We will see. I'd love to make them accessible. I'd love to have handwriting recognition technology adapted for Ottoman script so people can utilize these. Okay. Well, great. It was great meeting with you. And Julie, shall we end here?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your time and your expertise. I'm going to drop, again, just the link to the page for this class into the chat, and the recording of this presentation will be made available there. There is also a chat room on that page if people would like to continue to discuss this topic. So, and thank you, and I hope you guys all have a good rest of your evening or day, depending on where you are.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Bye.